Most people don't lose at rejection, they lose in the 30 seconds after it. That's the moment when a simple business event turns into a personal wound. A prospect says no, a hiring manager passes, a client ghosts. A partner hesitates, and instead of reading the situation, most people start protecting their ego. They either push harder, discount too fast, over-explain, disappear, or tell themselves a dramatic story about their value. And that is usually where the real opportunity dies, because in a lot of real professional life, rejection is not the end of the relationship. It's the first honest signal in the relationship. A yes can be cheap. A yes can be polite. A yes can be curiosity. But a no forces reality onto the table. It tells you where the friction is. It reveals what the other person is protecting. It exposes what they still don't trust, don't understand, don't prioritize, or don't have the capacity to handle. That means rejection is not just an emotional moment. It is information. And if you can't metabolize that information, you will keep calling bad timing a lack of talent, calling unclear value a lack of confidence, and calling solvable friction a final verdict. Most people have the wrong model here. They think rejection means one thing: I failed. That model is too primitive for adult life. In sales, in hiring, in leadership, in entrepreneurship, in creative work, and even in relationships, rejection almost never means only one thing. Sometimes it means no fit. Sometimes it means wrong timing. Sometimes it means the other person doesn't trust the result yet. Sometimes they do trust the result, but they don't trust the implementation. Sometimes it means they lack budget. Sometimes they lack authority. Sometimes they're afraid of internal politics. Sometimes they don't want to say, "This sounds good, but I can't explain this decision to my boss." Sometimes they just don't have the mental bandwidth. But most people flatten all of that into one sentence: they rejected me. That is not analysis. That is ego using bad language, and bad language creates bad strategy. Here's the core judgment. Rejection does not kill opportunity. Your unmanaged reaction to rejection does. Or said another way, the first no is not the end of trust. It is the first real test of whether trust can be built at all. That sounds simple, but the mechanism matters. Why do smart people become clumsy after hearing no? Because rejection is not processed by your brain as a neutral spreadsheet event. It hits old circuitry. Social rejection activates the brain's threat systems. You don't need a neuroscience degree to understand it. Your brain treats loss of status, exclusion, and uncertainty as danger. The alarm goes off. Your emotional system gets louder. Your reasoning system gets narrower. That's why after rejection people suddenly do one of three stupid things. They fight, they flee, or they freeze. Fight looks like pressure. What if I give you a discount? What exactly is the problem? Can we just do a trial? You're making a mistake. Flee looks like disappearing. No reply, no follow-up, no reflection, just silent resentment and self-protection. Freeze looks like intellectual confusion. You replay the conversation 10 times, but you never extract usable data. This happens because your alarm system is faster than your judgment. The amygdala, think of it as the brain's threat detector, reacts before your more rational planning system is fully online. And when that happens, your prefrontal cortex, the part that helps you think clearly, sequence, regulate, and decide, gets partially hijacked. You can still speak, but you stop thinking well. Then there's dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical. That's sloppy language. It is much more tied to motivation, anticipation, and reward prediction. When you expect a positive outcome, the deal, the offer, the reply, the close, your brain starts leaning toward that reward. When that expected reward gets blocked, you feel a drop. That drop creates urgency. You want relief, and that urge for relief is dangerous, because now you're not serving the relationship. You're trying to repair your own internal chemistry. That's when you send the needy follow-up. That's when you force the close. That's when you ask a bad question in a bad tone. That's when you pretend to be persistent, when really you're just dysregulated. Then another mechanism kicks in, your attention filter. Your brain can't process everything in the environment, so it uses a filtering system to decide what matters. Once you feel rejected, that filter starts hunting for confirming evidence. You notice delayed replies more. You remember the awkward part of the call more. You interpret neutral signals as negative. You start building a selective reality around being dismissed. This is why two people can face the exact same rejection and walk away with completely different futures. One person says, "They shut me down." The other says, "Good, now I know where the resistance actually is." Same event. Different nervous system, different attention, different future. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand so-called attraction. The non-mystical version is straightforward. Your attention and emotional state shape what opportunities you can perceive and act on. If your mind is flooded with injury, you don't see nuance. You don't spot timing windows. You don't hear the hidden invitation inside the rejection. You don't notice that the buyer didn't reject the outcome, they rejected the rollout risk. You don't notice that the hiring manager liked you but needed stronger evidence. You don't notice that the client wasn't resisting price, they were resisting uncertainty. State changes perception. Perception changes action. Action changes results. That is not magic. That is cognitive filtering under emotional regulation. Now zoom out. At a higher level, this is not really about rejection. It's about how you play the game. Naval has a well-known idea: play long-term games with long-term people. Most people love quoting that line. Very few people are emotionally built for it, because long-term games require you to stop treating every interaction like a referendum on your worth. They require you to think in compounding terms. A clean response to a rejection can compound into reputation. A useful follow-up can compound into trust. A respectful exit can compound into future referrals. A sharp post-mortem can compound into better positioning, better language, and a stronger offer. In other words, if you're playing a long-term game, rejection is not just a pass-fail event. It is part of the compounding process. Charlie Munger would approach this with inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I get more people to say yes?" ask the inverse. What do people do right after rejection that guarantees they destroy future opportunity? The list is brutally clear. They personalize too fast. They pressure instead of diagnose. They ask broad questions instead of precise ones. They follow up with no new relevance. They confuse persistence with insecurity. They make the other person manage their disappointment. They refuse to separate not now from not ever. And worst of all, they learn nothing, so the same rejection keeps repeating in different clothes. That last part matters. If rejection doesn't upgrade your model, then pain was wasted. And here's something else most people miss. Handling rejection well is a creative act. Creativity is not just art. It is the ability to generate useful responses under constraint. Anyone can feel smooth when things go their way. Real creativity shows up when reality says no. Can you stay present enough to reframe? Can you ask a better question? Can you turn a blocked path into a different path? Can you keep your identity stable while your approach changes? That is not positive thinking. That is adaptive intelligence, and it connects directly to flow. A lot of people wait to feel confident before they follow up after a rejection. That's backwards. Confidence is often the byproduct of motion, not the precondition. Action, done with structure, is what restores clarity. When you ask a clean question, write a thoughtful follow-up, review the conversation, and extract a lesson, your brain stops spiraling in abstraction and starts engaging with reality again. Action interrupts rumination. That's why people who learn fast often look emotionally stronger than they really are. They are not fearless. They simply convert emotion into process before emotion becomes identity. So how do you actually do this? You need a system, not a motivational phrase. A system. The first step is to stop using the word rejection as if it describes everything. It doesn't. You need to classify the no. Was it a bad fit, a timing issue, a trust issue, a value clarity issue, an authority issue, a budget issue, an implementation risk issue, a priority mismatch, a stakeholder mismatch, or a channel problem, meaning you approached the wrong person in the wrong way? If you don't classify the no, you can't respond intelligently to it. This is where deliberate practice matters. Real skill is not built by repeating the whole game mindlessly. It's built by isolating the specific point of failure, getting feedback, and correcting precisely. So after every meaningful rejection, force yourself through a structured debrief. Ask what exactly was rejected: my product, my timing, my framing, my ask, my credibility. What evidence did I miss before I made the offer? What risk was the other person protecting? What did they say directly? What did they imply indirectly? What would have made this easier for them to say yes to? And what is the smallest respectful next step, if any? That last phrase matters, if any, because maturity is not turning every no into a chase. Some rejections are clean. Some doors should stay closed. Not every rejection hides a future contract. Sometimes the opportunity is not the deal. Sometimes the opportunity is the lesson, the market signal, the cleaner positioning, or the preserved reputation. If someone says, "This is not a priority and I don't see that changing," take that seriously. If someone says, "We already solved this internally," don't romanticize it. If someone says, "Please don't follow up," then stop. Long-term opportunity is not built by disrespecting boundaries. It's built by being the kind of person people remember as sharp, calm, and useful. Here's a simple rule: respectful persistence adds relevance. Desperate persistence repeats desire. If your follow-up contains no new clarity, no new context, no reduced friction, and no new value, then you are not building trust. You are just sending your insecurity to their inbox. Let me make this concrete. Imagine you're selling a training platform to a sales director at a mid-sized company. You've had 2 conversations. The director is engaged. The problem is real. Their team is inconsistent. New hires ramp slowly. Managers coach differently. You've shown the value. The meeting goes well. And then at the end, she says, "This is interesting, but we're not moving forward this quarter." Now watch what most people do. They hear a no and immediately go into recovery mode. They say, "Is it price?" Or, "What if we start smaller?" Or, "I can get you a better deal." Or, "Can we just do a pilot?" That sounds proactive, but usually it's just panic wearing a blazer. A stronger response is calmer and narrower. You say, "Understood. I don't want to force a bad decision. To avoid guessing, can I ask one honest question? Is this mainly a budget issue, a priority issue, or a rollout capacity issue?" That question does 3 things at once. First, it lowers pressure. You're not fighting the no. Second, it shows emotional control, which is a trust signal. Third, it turns a vague rejection into usable data. And she says, honestly, rollout capacity. My managers are overloaded, and I can't add another system right now. That is not the same as, we don't want this. It means the sale didn't fail at value. It failed at implementation risk. Now the smart move is not to push harder. It is to respond to the actual resistance. You might say, that makes sense. In that case, a better conversation might be about low-lift rollout, not the tool itself. If helpful, I can send a 1-page pilot design that requires almost no manager time. No pressure to move now, just something you can keep on file if this becomes urgent later. That is a very different posture. You're no longer trying to get a yes out of their discomfort. You're helping them reduce decision friction on their own timeline. And here's the thing people underestimate: that behavior gets remembered. Maybe nothing happens this month. Maybe nothing happens this quarter. But 6 months later, one of 2 things is likely. Either the original problem becomes painful enough that they revisit the category, and you're the person who made the problem easier to think about. Or they move companies, meet someone else with the same problem, and remember how you handled the no. That is what long-term opportunity actually looks like. Not fantasy, not manifestation. Memory, trust, relevance, timing. Now let's take a different scenario. Imagine you interview for a role you really want, you get close, then you get the email, they went with someone else. Most people do one of two things. They either vanish or they send a generic, "Thank you for the opportunity" note that creates no future path. A better move is this: "Thank you for the update. I appreciate the process. If you're open to it, I'd value one honest point of feedback. What capability or evidence was most missing for you in my profile? I'm asking because I want to improve with precision, not guess." That sentence does something powerful. It separates your identity from the outcome. It shows you can handle truth. It also invites the other person to invest in your development, which subtly deepens the professional relationship. Suppose they reply, "You were strong, but we needed someone who had managed a larger cross-functional rollout. Now you know what to build." And if 3 months later, you send a short update showing that you led exactly that kind of project, you are no longer a rejected candidate haunting their inbox. You are a professional who learns fast. Again, that's long-term opportunity. Now let's go deeper. Why does handling rejection well create trust? Because trust is not built only by competence. It is built by the other person's sense that you are safe to deal with under uncertainty. In business, people are always reading for this, even when they can't explain it explicitly. Are you stable when things don't go your way? Do you listen when reality interrupts your agenda? Can you tolerate friction without becoming manipulative? Can you think clearly under disappointment? Do you protect the relationship or just the transaction? Those signals matter because professional decisions are social decisions wrapped in logic. People do not only buy outcomes, they buy the future experience of working with you. And your behavior after rejection gives them a preview of that future. If you become defensive, needy, slippery, or pushy, they imagine more of that later. If you become calm, precise, useful, and low pressure, they imagine that too. Humans mirror emotional states more than they admit. Calm creates calm. Urgency creates resistance. Regulation is persuasive because it lowers the perceived danger of engaging with you. That's one reason the best salespeople, negotiators, and leaders often sound less hungry than everyone else in the room. It's not because they care less. It's because they know that emotional steadiness reduces friction. Now let's talk about skill building in a more systematic way. If you want to turn rejection into long-term opportunity, you need 4 practices. First, build rejection tolerance without building emotional numbness. The point is not to stop caring. The point is to care without collapsing. A simple way to train this is to change the sentence in your head, not "I got rejected." Instead, "A specific offer in a specific form at a specific time was declined." That sounds minor, but it's cognitive precision. Precision protects identity. When identity is less threatened, the rational brain stays online longer. Second, install a post-rejection review process. Do not trust memory when emotion is high. Write it down, or speak it out loud into a note, or run the conversation through an AI review tool if you have one. Technology is not the point. Feedback is: capture what happened, what you expected, where reality diverged, what signal you missed, what question you should have asked earlier, what you will test next time. The goal is not self-therapy. The goal is model improvement. Third, practice response scripts, but don't become robotic. You need a few clean lines ready because emotion shrinks verbal intelligence. Here are examples. Understood. To make sure I learn from this, what made this a no right now? Totally fair. Was the main issue timing, risk, or fit? I don't want to chase something that isn't real. Is this a closed door, or more a not now? If this problem becomes more urgent later, what would need to be true for the conversation to make sense again? These are not pressure tactics, they are diagnostic tools. Fourth, track whether your rejections are becoming more intelligent. This is where most people fail. They say they're learning, but they're only enduring. Track 3 numbers. How many rejections did you get? How many gave you usable information? How many reopened later in any form? Sale, referral, feedback, future conversation, stronger positioning. That tracking matters because what gets measured gets improved. More importantly, it retrains your brain. Instead of seeing rejection as dead space, you start seeing a pipeline of information and relationship capital. And that changes your motivation. Now, there is an important boundary here. Do not turn this idea into a new self-deception. Some people hear rejection is opportunity and then become unable to walk away. They keep chasing dead accounts, dead leads, dead relationships, dead fantasies. That is not resilience. That is attachment pretending to be strategy. Opportunity is not always in continuing. Sometimes opportunity is in exiting cleanly. A graceful final message can be a long-term asset, something like, "Thanks for the direct answer. I appreciate the clarity. I'll close this out on my side. If priorities change later and it becomes useful, feel free to reach out." Wishing you and the team a strong quarter. That kind of exit does two things. It protects your dignity and it leaves behind a good memory. Never underestimate the value of being easy to say no to. People remember relief. Now let's connect this to a bigger truth about work in the modern world. Whether you are selling a product, pitching an idea, interviewing for a role, building a company, freelancing, or trying to earn trust inside your own organization, you are always selling something. Value, judgment, credibility, reliability, clarity. And in an AI-driven world, where information is cheap and generic language is everywhere, the real differentiator is not who knows more facts. It's who can convert knowledge into trust under real human conditions. That means your market value is not defined only by your expertise. It is defined by how well your expertise survives contact with other people's fear, uncertainty, constraints, incentives, and timing. That is why rejection is such a powerful teacher. It reveals whether your knowledge is practical. It reveals whether your offer is clear. It reveals whether your process creates safety. It reveals whether your ego is too expensive to do good work. And it forces you to confront a hard truth. You do not get paid for what makes sense inside your own head. You get paid for what other people can trust enough to move on. So what should you do with this today, tomorrow, and this week? Today, go back to your last 5 meaningful rejections, not the random ones, the ones that still carry emotional charge. For each one, classify the no. Don't use vague language. Was it fit, timing, authority, trust, clarity, budget, or implementation risk? Then write one sentence. What was actually rejected? Tomorrow, write 3 post-rejection questions you can use without sounding defensive. Practice them out loud until they sound natural, not polished, natural. If you only practice when calm, you'll still fail when emotion hits. Rehearsal is for stress. This week, after every no, do a 10-minute debrief. If possible, within an hour while the memory is still fresh. Ask what you missed before the rejection happened. That question alone will level up your judgment because most rejections are obvious in retrospect. The clues were there earlier in weak engagement, vague answers, missing stakeholders, low urgency, unclear ownership, polite language without commitment. Also this week, send one intelligent follow-up to a past rejection that was probably mishandled. Not a needy re-entry, a useful one. Something like, "Last time we spoke, the issue seemed less about the result and more about rollout burden. I came across a simple implementation model that reduces manager involvement significantly. If that's still relevant, I'm happy to send it over. If not, no problem." That is how adults reopen conversations. And here's one more practice if you're serious. build a rejection library. Every time you get a no, store the language. What exact words did they use? Over time, patterns appear. You'll find that many rejections are recurring translations of the same few concerns. Once you see the pattern, you can improve your discovery process before the rejection even happens. That is the real win. The highest level is not becoming emotionally strong enough to survive rejection. The highest level is becoming perceptive enough to detect the conditions that create rejection before you walk into it. That is judgment, and judgment compounds. So no, rejection is not automatically good. It's not romantic. It still stings, it should. You're human. But if every rejection only hurts you, then you're paying full price and getting none of the value. A professional learns to extract value. They use rejection to sharpen their offer, regulate their state, improve their questions, refine their timing, and build a reputation for being solid under pressure. That's why some people seem to get lucky later. What looks like luck is often accumulated trust from moments where they did not get what they wanted, but still behaved like the kind of person others want to work with. That's the final point. People watch you most carefully when you don't get your way. That is when your real operating system becomes visible. Not your ambition, not your branding, not your vocabulary, your structure. So if you want to turn rejection into long-term opportunity, stop asking, "How do I avoid hearing no?" Ask a better question. When reality says no, do I become smaller or do I become more precise? Because the market does not reward private potential. It rewards people who can stay clear enough, calm enough, and useful enough to keep building trust after disappointment. And in the long run, that trait is worth more than charm. The first no doesn't tell you your future. It tells you whether you know how to build one. If this gave you a clearer framework, follow this page or channel and share it with someone who's in the middle of a hard season. And in the comments, answer this. What's one rejection in your life that felt final at the time, but later turned out to contain a lesson, a relationship, or an opportunity you almost missed?